All right, we are in Senate institutions. It is Tuesday, May 20th, and this is a special meeting, and it is to review a proposal of amendment on H50 from Senator Watson, who is here to present it to us. So Senator Watson.
Sure.
Good
Hello.
morning.
Good morning.
We're not usually here in the morning.
Yeah, but you're here now. Thank you for making a special case.
Of course.
Yes, so Senator Watson, in reading this language, had a question about who gets to decide what are state purposes. And so I had some email exchange with legislative counsel about that. I wanted to ensure that the decision-making power of like who gets to choose what the state purposes are is either with us or that is somehow linked in statute somewhere. So the proposed amendment is pretty short. It just adds this clause to the end. So just the whole thing would read, the head of each agency shall additionally indicate in its inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner whether any building is vacant and whether any land is unnecessary for state purposes, which include the statutory. So in this linear part, which include the statutory policy and purposes of any state agency, so each. As I understand it, there is a statutory policy and purpose for each agency already. So one of the reasons that this came up for me was the context of the potential for the federal government to be selling off, like it's a national park, the state, or it's national park land, which I am very concerned about. And so thinking about that in terms of our state parts, the statutory policy and purpose for the Department of Forest Parks and Rec includes conservation of forests, timberlands, woodlands, and soil and recreational resources of the state. So I feel like that is a nice way to lay out the purpose of that agency, or I should say that department. I felt like that covered it, just to make it clear as to what we're talking about with the purposes of the state. And just to be clear, I don't think anybody right now, in this administration at the state level is planning to sell state parkland, but just trying to give us some assurance for the future.
I don't read your amendment that way. I read it that it's doing just the opposite of what you're saying, is that you are putting it on the commissioner or secretaries of these to deem that these things are valuable or not, and that in fact, if there was a supermajority that came in here and wanted to override what their thought process was to keep a state park, that this allows us to actually have a supermajority to sell something or over the objections of where this is at. I don't see your amendment doing what you're proposing it doing. So I need more context, because I can't vote for it the way that it is right now. I don't see that it's saying what you're asking it to say. I see that it's doing it's the opposite of what you're asking it to say. So I'm missing something.
Interesting.
So I don't yet see your concern, so I want to hear more about what you're saying. But to me, this just is another. It adds the purposes which are already in the state agency.
To me, the bill is making the state justify why they're hanging on to something. And that's what I see that in that. And if they don't come up with a great justification, then we'll just sell it. That's how I'm reading this amendment.
Okay.
And I don't like this.
Okay, I don't know if I don't see it that way, but we can get our attorney in. But let's see. Senator Watson has more. Or we have questions.
That was it.
Let me ask you: is your intent? I had thought that the purposes would already kind of be obvious and that this is stating the existing use
Mhm.
of the property, not the potential use. I mean, most properties could have 4 or 5 uses.
Sure.
And actually, I wouldn't mind that if that were in here, if it were stated. But this is intended to, state the existing purpose, is my understanding.
Right, to include the statutory purposes that are already existing for each agency or department.
But whoever owns the property.
Right, so we can certainly, ask if this is exclusive, if like, because my thought was that this was the purposes might be broader than this. It just includes the statutory purpose. So the thought was, could somebody come along and say, it is no longer our purpose to provide recreational opportunities, for example. And so as long as we're citing the statutory purpose that does include that, then it would.
This is the line that bothers me.
Mhm.
On line 13, the head of each agency shall additionally indicate its inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner, whether any building is vacant and whether any land is unnecessary for state purposes. What gives that department head the right to make that decision? Which includes the statutory policy and purposes of any agency. That is what bothers me with the wording.
So
Okay, that was already in it.
Yeah.
The part that is added
is after.
is which include the statutory policy and purposes of any state agency. So it's half of line 15 and line 16.
Mhm.
That's all that's
Which-
being added.
So it sounds like we're actually agreeing, because I read that first part and I was like, well, if the commissioner, whoever they may be someday, do they get to decide the purposes of the state? And so that to me was the need for more anchoring, I guess, which is why that latter clause I'm proposing that latter clause, and open to, if that's not the right clause, happy to.
So why don't we just get rid of the head of the agency shall additionally indicate an inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner, whether any building is vacant, whether any land is unnecessary for state purposes. Why don't we just get rid of that? What does that
Because
do
that's-
for the bill?
That is what. In the
Because
first,
you've covered everything up above what you're asking them to do. That's what you've done. You've covered it. So why don't we just get rid of 13 to 16 and then we don't even need an amendment? All we just do is just get rid of that and we're good.
well, we would need an amendment because what we received from the House
Well,
adds
or,
that. Well,
or
so
we just strike it.
let's get the attorney up here, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Morning.
Morning. Thanks for being here.
Sure. Gray, Office of Council. You guys can ask me specific questions or I can just respond to everything that I've heard thus far.
Yeah, why don't you respond to everything?
So I think there was agreement between the folks in these chairs actually on what the purpose of the bill is. The bill with its new title is, underutilized lands and the like. So that sentence on lines 13 through 16 is kind of the heart of the bill. What it's saying is we want agencies for these inventory purposes to specify whether they think that something is unnecessary for state purposes. So that is that's kind of the heart of the bill. So if you eliminated those lines, which isn't what this proposal is, but if you did do that, it would change what the bill is attempting to do, I would say. And then just to this specific amendment, the addition of which include the statutory policy and purposes of any state agency doesn't in any way expand what is currently here, right? It's just giving some content to what constitutes state purposes. And the way that I think about this is that what's being asked is for an agency to make a determination during this inventorying process whether they think that something is unnecessary and what is it unnecessary for state purposes. So what this tells us is when they think about what state purposes are in making that determination, they need to think about the statutory policy and purposes of any state agency, but it is not an expansion. State purposes is super broad. So this is just clarifying that those would fall within that bucket. I could actually see someone trying to make the opposite argument, which is that by specifying just this call out, you actually narrow what state purposes are. But because it's just inclusive language, that is not what it's doing. It's just making clear look, you need to think about state purposes, and among those state purposes, you should think about the policy and purposes of state agencies, including those that we discussed before. Does that make sense?
Yes, and can you confirm that whatever is stated in the inventory, that doesn't have authority?
Yeah, this
The
is just,
state can do what it wants with the property. You know, there's zoning, there's all sorts of other things, but
this is just saying for the inventorying, the head of an agency should note if they think there's no use for this property, meaning that it's underutilized and could be made available for other purposes, but it is not dictating selling off that
Right.
property. It's just
Or-
giving information.
or what the property is used for.
Right.
It's not, it's not authority. It doesn't,
No.
give
This
any
this is
authority.
literally just inventorying, yeah,
Right,
providing information.
okay. Senator Ingles?
I see it as for what's in front of us, what's been in front of us, the old prison. That the state's gonna have to justify why they want to own that property. And there's a lot of reasons why that they want to own that property still, or why they don't want to get rid of that property. Or, I mean, I can go around, you go around a fishing access. Why do you need a fishing access there? Why do you need this? Why do you need that? Why do you need this? Why do you need that? And I just see it an overreach of us and so many levels of trying to tell the state in itself, why are you hanging on to these properties? And it comes from the real estate part of me that says that, you know, I know what real estate value is to any holding. And I just see the state, I just see this opening up for the state to now having to justify for every piece of land that they have. And if not, then okay, well, let's sell it. And that's what I see here. And maybe I'm seeing it wrong. I see it that we're now forcing these department heads to start justifying all of their holdings. And if not, then well, it just makes sense to sell them. And that's what I see what goes on with that wording.
Which is the opposite of the intent of the provider or
Right.
the person who's proposing the amendment. Yeah, just one second. I just see this, I understand your perspective as a realtor, real estate person. I think the intent of the inventory is for folks who are not familiar with all of the different properties of the state, future legislators, to understand what properties, like BGS has multiple properties, they're used for different reasons. The existing reason is what I would expect to be listed in this inventory, and I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I don't think it leads to more or less likelihood of it being sold. Senator,
In essence, what we're asking is for the commissioner that oversees that particular property to give their opinion on the usefulness of the property.
What's being done is that the commissioner of BGS currently receives an inventory of state buildings from each agency. And they get things like how much square footage is available, how much is used for storage, this whole list of things. And what's being asked now is to provide that information on a more regular basis. And then this key part, that the agency itself provide in its inventory a description whether they think it's underutilized is basically what they're being asked. Is this land just sitting without use? That is the request. The genesis of this bill, which is maybe helpful for understanding what the purposes are, were to try to find state land that could be put toward housing, but obviously that is no longer the language that is in the bill, but that was the genesis was, is there a way to collect information to see what state land is underutilized? And so what this is an information gathering piece. But you could definitely make the argument that information gathering is for the purposes of disposing of the land in a particular way. But this doesn't cause any disposition of property. It just says, please describe if you think this is underutilized.
yes,
Senator Engel, your objection necessarily is for the agency head to give their opinion at all, because it may sway one way or the other.
I don't even think it's even up to the agency in itself to, because people change. I just think it's a broader discussion to be had than one agency had to give their opinion about whether we should parcel that property or not. I don't know that person should have that power. And I'm just trying to find the words. I can see it vividly in my mind as far as where we're at. And people just say, why do you own that? 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 Well, because we do. And well, why do you have it? Because we have it. I mean, and that's really how the discussion should be. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to justify why you have it. And that's what I'm seeing that we're pushing it towards. I get, Counselor, what you're talking about as far as what the intent of the light of this bill was. It was to look through state properties to see if we could put housing. Then why do we say that? Then why do we say that in this bill? Why do we say, okay, well, the intent of this is to see if there's underperforming properties within the state that we could use for housing. Why do we say that?
My understanding is that they started there and then there was a previous inventory that was done every year that stopped. And so this is to restart that inventory. Is that accurate?
I don't know if it has stopped. I know that it was through conversations with BGS that the language specific to housing was eliminated, and I honestly was not in the room when the testimony was happening. But it is truly an information gathering request. I would say that if you added something here specific to housing, you would still need to maintain something along these lines, right? This is kind of like getting at, do we have things that aren't used? And it's agnostic as to what you might use them for instead, right? It could be housing, it could be other, it doesn't cause anything to happen. It just provides the information to the commissioner who otherwise doesn't have the on the ground information as to whether or not something is underutilized.
I was trying to avoid making this anything personal, but it's the only way I'm gonna be able to describe it. So I was given 16 acres of land, and I don't have to go into why I was given 16 acres of land, but I was given 16 acres of land. It was absolutely positively useless land as far as anybody's eyes. And everybody's, well, why would you even take that land? Why would you even do it? And so, it was what it was. And it was 16 acres of land. And I thought about it for 5 years. I said, you know what? Why don't I just put some permits on those lands, and why don't I just do it and this and that? And when it's all said and done, I subdivided it. I made 5 building lots out of it. And so this 16 acres of land that I had, I wouldn't even have been able to get $16,000 for it. It's useless land. I mean, it was absolute, but then I put those permits on it and I sold it for $150,000. So I do not want somebody coming in and saying to the state, why do you have this useless land? And then dictating from what that land can be later on in life. And that's what I see this bill doing as far as justifying this useless piece of land that might not be useful right now, but out of our lifetime, it will become useful. And so we just should sell it. We should sell it. We should sell it because you can't justify why we own it. You can't justify it. Well, it's not up to us to justify why we own that land. Later on in life, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, when we're dead and gone, that land is going to become valuable in such a way. And that's what I do not want to do, is have this whole inventory of useless land that we just make these decisions that we need to sell it. And that's where this is going.
Okay. It's good to understand your concern. The intent of the Second Amendment is exactly in line with what your concern is, where it would protect property because it would, especially when it's conservation. I mean, maybe we should say, if there are any conservation purposes. I mean, it's really late to be doing this. We're meeting in 7 minutes.
The thing I would offer is it does pick up that, right? Like that's why the reference is to statutory policy and purposes. of any state agency, and it is meant to be broader, because the more you build out this inclusive language, the more it seems to cabin the scope of what state purposes are. And I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is for state purposes to be big. And so this is a way of saying, because the bigger the state purposes are, the less the notice up to the commissioner that something is unnecessary will be. Does that make right? So it's the bigger state purposes are, the more protective you can think of that as being. And so this just calls out, when you think about state purposes, think of every state agency. What are its policy and purposes? That's the state purpose for which the land may be necessary. So think about that when you report to the commissioner if you think something is underutilized.
Right, yes.
If I can add something, so just as an example, let's say that a piece of land is held by, I don't know, the Department of Corrections. But maybe that land doesn't hold that value for that any longer, but it could be used for something else like conservation. Because the language says for any state agency, then that, in my mind, that gives it flexibility in terms of saying, yes, it's held by this one agency now, but it might fall under a purpose for a different agency.
Or maybe it says, I can't tell you what the purpose is. It has no purpose to us. And then it's, let's sell it. Maybe it's that.
That's a bigger question for the bill itself.
Which I just think that if that is what a concern is, or would be, that there's language to be had to say it in a different way.
And that's why we have specific processes to authorize that to authorize land to be sold. The agency can't just go off and sell land. It takes the legislature to authorize that.
But you're asking somebody to make an opinion of it, and it starts the process.
Right, and so what I was, and my thought was, so say the legislature was looking at the list and said, oh, we could sell this one. And it didn't have, they hadn't said that it was a park or a natural area. But if it did say park or natural area, that would slow down that process.
There's a piece of land on Lake Memphremagog. It was going to be a boat launch. And they decided to put someplace else. And it's got 400 feet of frontage on Lake Memphremagog. And the conventional wisdom as far as on this would say, well, no, we don't have any use for that. None whatsoever. None. No use for that. Let's sell. And that's where the conversation is going to go when you start putting stuff like that on this. It's going to, well, they can't justify it. No.
I would say public access to the water.
No, they already have one. They have one a mile down the road. They decided to put it elsewhere, but they still have this 400 feet of very valuable land. And it is very valuable land. It's 400 feet of lakefront on Lake Memphremagog, probably worth $2 million to the right buyer or whatever, or whoever will pay. Oh, then let's go sell that. Let's go. We got a budget crunch right now. Let's go through this list because the commissioner's already said it's got no value to them. Let's sell it.
All right, we have 5 minutes. What's the group feel? You're the reporter of the bill, so you haven't even had a chance to talk.
While all the folks are talking.
Yeah.
I am concerned about what Russ is saying, though albeit to a lesser degree than he is. But I do also see that, which includes the statutory policy and purposes of the agency, whether it's unnecessary or not. I see that as a little bit more of a as work for the heads of each agency. And I think they would have to, now you're getting into something that sounds more official, whether over just the opinion of the head of the agency. You're having to back up your opinions and it's getting a little bit more official. I think they'd probably have to send it to legal. They'd probably have to have more in-depth conversations in the agency. I'm not against it, but I wish we had a little bit more time to hear from like the head of an agency or hear from Wanda in person. Because, I'm also thinking about AHS and all the other departments. And I think that things are going to be a very different agency to agent or the department. Yeah.
And to be clear, the ask is of the agencies and not BGS, right? It's for these folks reporting to BGS.
Right, and I actually think it would be helpful for them to know the purposes of their land, the land that they're responsible for. I think that's not unreasonable at all, and they should know it. All right, what do you all think?
I think that the Senator Watson's amendment doesn't change functionally what we already passed through here. It just specifies for the agencies to consider their own policies. So I don't think it changes much, but it would help the agencies at least to look there first. So I'm in favor of the amendment, and I will also in favor of the bill that they can.
Senator Major?
The person or the head who was close to them, we got 2 minutes.
Yeah, this is, you know what, I think we should just, not do this right now. Unless,
I mean, we're allowed to pass over it.
yeah, why don't we pass over it today? We'll have this conversation again at another meeting,
Yeah.
okay?
Unless
I don't like to make, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, I don't like to make rush to make decisions. I
Yeah.
think it's.
I would love to get,
You know.
I would love to get somebody in here, and talk about it. Maybe